This Perek Beis Mishnah Daled. This Mishnah continues with the 6 additional brachas that were added from the previous Mishnah. And this Mishnah mentions more about the actual brachas, how they concluded these additional 6 brachas. Al Horishonahu Omer, on the first bracha he would say, and the Bartanura immediately points out, this is referring to the bracha of Goel Yisrael, although this is not one of the additional brachas that are made in the Shemona Esrei. Nevertheless, says the Bartanura, Hu maschil laharich, he starts already in this bracha of Goel Yisrael to lengthen that bracha. Says the Bartanura, Va'afa pisha eina miminyan sheish, it's not one of the additional 6. Nevertheless, it's called Rishona, the first, because this is the first bracha that is lengthened. And in which way does he lengthen this bracha? He says in the bracha of Goel Yisrael, Mi she'ona es Avram bahar Hamoria, Hashem who answered Avram in Har Hamoria with the Akedah of Yitzchak. He was answered in as much as Yitzchak was ultimately not offered up. Hu Yane Eschem, he should answer you, Klal Yisrael, for rain. Ve'yishma b'kol tza'akaschem hayom hazeh, and he should hear the voice of your cry today. Baruch ato Hashem, Goel Yisrael. That's the end of that bracha. So that's the additional words that were added to that bracha. The Tiferes Yisrael points out that after that bracha of Goel Yisrael, as in fact it's been lengthened, they would blow a tekiah, true a tekiah, and they would say, as we find in Slichus, Vayavu Hashem al pono v'yikra Hashem Hashem, at the end of that bracha. The Mishnah continues, Al hashniya ha'omer, on the second bracha, he says, this is the second lengthened bracha, but is the first of the new brachas that have been specifically added. What is said, and of course it links up, as we learnt in the previous Mishnah, this, according to the Tanakama, we paskin like the Tanakama in the previous Mishnah, the psukim are of zichronos, the psukim that we find in Rosh Hashanah, those are mentioned, and then this Mishnah continues, Mi she'ona es avuseinu al Yamsuf, Hashem that answered, the one that answered our fathers at Yamsuf, at Kriyas Yamsuf. Hu yane eschem, again he should answer you, v'yishma kol tzakaschem hayom hazeh, baruch ato Hashem, zoicher hanishkoches, linking up to the psukim that would have been said as it's zichronos. What's the link of zichronos with Kriyas Yamsuf Klal Yisrael in Mitzrayim? The Tosfos Yontov mentions, because Klal Yisrael were forgotten, seemed as if they'd been forgotten. They were so long in Mitzrayim, they'd given up hope. Imagine they were forgotten. And therefore it's relevant to say the mention of Klal Yisrael in Mitzrayim in this bracha of Zichronos. The next, Al Shlishis, the third lengthened bracha, the second new bracha. As we mentioned in the previous Mishnah, this is Shofaris, where the psukim, as we say on Rosh Hashanah, of Shofaris would be mentioned. That bracha continues in the following way. Al Shlishis hu'omer mi she'ona es Yehoshua b'Gilgal, who answered Yehoshua in Gilgal, around Yericho, when ultimately the walls collapsed. Hu yane eschem, he should answer you. V'yishma kol tzakaschem hayom hazeh, and answer your cry today. Baruch ato Hashem, shomea teruah, as psukim previously had been mentioned about shofaris. The link between Yehoshua and shofaris, again, Tosfos Yontov mentions, because of course the shofar was sounded at Yericho, at Gilgal, and therefore it's very relevant that Yehoshua should be mentioned in this particular bracha. The next bracha, al horvius, on the fourth lengthened bracha, the third new bracha, hu oimer, mi she'ona es Shmuel b'mitzvah. Hashem who answered Shmuel b'mitzvah, the fight against the Pelishtim. This is mentioned in Shmuel. It's in Shmuel Aleph, Perek Zayin. This bracha, of course, is linked. In the previous Mishnah we mentioned the psukim would have been said of the tefillah el shehamalos el Hashem batzorosoli korosi vayaneni. In my distress I called out to Hashem. This is the first of the shehamalos, and this is this particular bracha. It's linked with Shmuel b'mitzvah. And I continue in the Mishnah. Hu yane eschem, he should answer you. V'yishmak b'kol tzakaschem hayom hazeh. Hear your cry today. Baruch atu Hashem shomea tza'aka. And the link of Shmuel against the Pelishtim, and this bracha shomea tza'aka, Tosis Yontov points out, as we quoted the psukim of Batzorosoli, in my distress, it certainly is relevant, the distress that caused of the Pelishtim. And the conclusion, Shomea Tza'aka, we actually find this word used in Shmuel, where it says, Vayizak Shmuel. And Shmuel cried out, the Zayin and the Tzadi interchangeable, as the Radak mentions in Tehillim. So here, Shomea Tza'aka linked to Vayizak Shmuel crying out on that occasion. The next bracha, Ala Chamishis, on the fifth, lengthened bracha ho'omer, Mi she'ono es Eliyahu b'Har HaKarmel. The one who answered Eliyahu Hanovi in Har Carmel, of course, where the idol worshippers were there, and Hashem had called out, and Eliyahu had called out to Hashem to send down a fire to prove that Hashem hu Elokim. Hu yane eschem, he should answer you, b'kol v'yishma b'kol tzakaschem hayom hazeh, and hear your cry today. Baruch atu Hashem shomea tefillah. Linking up with Eliyahu, and in the previous Mishnah we saw that the psukim that would have been mentioned at this bracha would be Esor enai el hehorim, I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Of course here, this was in Har HaKarmel, very relevant. And the conclusion, as in fact Eliyahu, quoted in Melachim, says, Aneni Hashem Aneni, answer me. That's clearly tefillah. Therefore, quite relevant to say here, Baruch atu Hashem shomea tefillah, hearing the tefillah, the prayer. Ala shishis, on the sixth lengthened bracha, the fifth new one, hu oimer, mi she'ono es Yonah b'mei hadoga. The one who answered and heard Yonah in the big fish, in the stomach, the belly of the fish. Hu yane eschem, he should answer you, v'yishma b'kol tzakaschem hayom hazeh, and hear the voice of your cry today, Baruch atu Hashem ho'oine ba'is tzara. And clearly, linking up to the previous Mishnah, the psukim that would be mentioned here would be also from the She'amalos, mi ma'amakim krosicha Hashem, I call out to Hashem from the depths, clearly relevant to Yonah b'mei hadoga, in the fish. And as in fact mentioned in Yonah says, Korosi mitzoroli, I called out in this distress, the distress to me, the word Korosi, I called out in the distress. Clearly here, the words Ho'oine be'is tzara, who answers at a time of distress, quite relevant again. The final bracha, al hashvius, the seventh lengthened bracha, the sixth new bracha, hu oimer, mi she'ona es David ve'es Shlomo b'noi b'Yerushalayim, the one who answered David and Shlomo his son in Yerushalayim. And this refers to, this one in particular points out with David, as we find where he had prayed, and there were 3 years of famine, and Shlomo, where Shlomo had inaugurated the Beis Hamikdash, The psukim for David HaMelech are also found in Shmuel Beis, chapter Chof Aleph, where David HaMelech, at the time of 3 years of famine, David HaMelech davening to Hashem, and Shlomo, as we mentioned, where Shlomo says in the inauguration of the Beis HaMikdash, psukim in Malachim Aleph, where he says, in case there should be any famine, any drought, Hashem should answer Klal Yisrael. And clearly this was for Eretz Yisrael in particular. So back to the Mishnah, Misha Ones David v'Shlomo b'Rabbi Yerushalayim, Hu Yane Eschem, he should answer you. V'yishma b'koil tzakaschem hayom hazen, hear your cry. The psukim that would have been mentioned here, as we mentioned in the previous Mishnah, would be Tfilah la'oni kiyatov, the poor person, kiyatov, when he'd be fainting out of distress, out of the, clearly relevant here to the drought, linking up with David and Shlomo. And the Mishnah concludes, Baruch ato Hashem hamerachim al ha'oretz, who has mercy on Eretz Yisrael, on the land. And clearly David and Shlomo were particularly being mispalel for the land of Eretz Yisrael. That concludes the Mishnah.